Hello everyone and welcome to the start of our F1 2004 career mode. Yes, we return this weekend here to Albert Park, Australia for pre-season testing where we talk through some of the driver moves and everything else going on. Of course, it has been a long time since the end of the 2003 campaign. We ended up victorious. We became a two-time Formula 1 world champion. But I already announced at the end of last season where I was going to be racing in 2004, so yeah, go back, check that video out, or stick around and in kind of the next 15 minutes or so, you'll find out where we are going. Kickstarting things though, with Ferrari, of course, the top team at the end of last season. A couple of world championships have been wrapped up in recent years. Micheal Schumacher, once again, is sticking with the team, rather obviously. I mean, Schumacher and Ferrari were kind of just the lineup that always stayed together in the late 90s and early 2000s, and well, that isn't changing for 2004, of course. The real-life F2004, one of, if not the most iconic Formula 1 cars of all time. Schumi taking 12 victories from the first 13 Grand Prix. It would have been 13 in a row had he not been collected in the tunnel at the Monaco Grand Prix that year. But if you guys remember, all the way back to 1999 in this career mode, the game gave us one of the oddest driver moves I've ever seen. Ralf Schumacher actually joined Micheal at Ferrari. Now, sadly, not long after that, the whole mod corrupted. I basically had to reset it, as well as a few other bits and pieces. And these two have never been teammates again. Clearly, the mod has decided that Micheal Schumacher and Ralf Schumacher, once again, are going to be back together at Ferrari. So hopefully this season is actually, the mod's going to work throughout the entirety of the campaign. But yes, Micheal Schumacher and Ralf Schumacher, we never saw them on the same team IRL in Formula 1. I believe the only team they both ever drove for was Jordan, of course, many years apart. Micheal obviously back in 1991 for just one Grand Prix, and Ralf Schumacher, of course, in 97 and 1998, if I remember correctly as well. But yeah, going to be very interesting. Ferrari, as always, look to be competitive this season. I'm sure nothing will change as we head into 2004. A team, though, that ended 2003 really strong. McLaren chalked up a couple of victories right towards the end of the campaign. Really do look like they should be competitive in 2004. But they are waiting on a major upgrade coming for the first race of the European leg of the campaign. So the first few races, McLaren might really struggle. They're not going to be outside the top 10 or anything like that. But it seems like they put a lot of their eggs into the 2003 basket, and their 2004 car at the moment just has a few minor issues with it. Just like real life, just like last season, McLaren maintain their lineup of David Coulthard and Kimi Räikkönen, of course, combining experience with the Scotsman and youth with Kimi, of course. This obviously IRL was David Coulthard's last ever season with the McLaren F1 team before he ever joined Red Bull. So whether we'll see the same thing inside this mod or not is a very different question. Like I said though, McLaren, they are waiting for those upgrades on the car, ready for the first race back in Europe, which I believe will be at the Spanish Grand Prix, if I remember correctly. So yeah, we're hoping that obviously we're going to be able to try and capitalise on them, but I'm sure, if they're not fighting for wins right at the start of the new season, they're certainly going to be fighting for wins a little bit further down into the campaign as well. And of course, always, McLaren are one of those teams that's near the front or at the front pretty much every year. Haven't seen much success, of course, since we left them at the end of 2001, but you never know what might happen as we head into 2004. Next up then is going to be another team that saw a big resurgence towards the end of 2003, and that of course is Williams. A very exciting lineup last year of Fernando Alonso and Juan Pablo Montoya, and both drivers have decided to stay with the team, ready for 2004. There was some talks that Juan Pablo Montoya might leave, might try to go to McLaren and things like that, but ultimately he engaged in his contract extension with the team, and let me tell you, that might have been a very wise choice by JPM. Williams look very fast as we head into this season. Fernando Alonso, he's been setting some very good pre-season testing times as well. JPM seems to be a few tenths away. Could this potentially cause a bit of unrest, a bit of rivalry inside the team as well, especially if for the first time we properly see Williams able to fight for a World Championship crown. You know, they were able to pick up a few victories towards the end of last year. You know, they were always kind of there or thereabouts, and especially with such a young and feisty lineup, you know, it was always going to be about learning and everything like that as well. But for 2004, I think Williams' main goal is to obviously kind of cleaned off the edges, really smooth down the operation. They've obviously got that incredibly powerful BMW engine in the back of the car as well, so only time will tell as to how they get on this year, but I would definitely not be against putting money on Williams to at least get to the season finale, still with a shot at the World Championship. But of course, with these V10 engines, reliability can always change things before you know it as well. Next up then is going to be Renault. Their lineup last year of Jenson Button and Alexander Wurz, another team that has actually kept their lineup as we head into 2004. Things don't look good though for Renault. They narrowly missed out. Reliability dogged them last year. The amount of times Jenson Button was either leading a Grand Prix or fighting for the lead in a Grand Prix, and just it never worked out for them. Unfortunately, they went down the rabbit hole a bit like McLaren, spending far too much time continuing trying to develop the 2003 car, and they are very much on the back foot as we head into 2004. They might be a team that struggles to score points in the first few races. I'm sure, again, just like McLaren, we are going to see them bring upgrades as the season goes on, and, you know, they'll be looking to try and become more competitive once again. But, you know, Jenson Button's pole lap at Le Castellet last year and things like that, I think we're going to be optimistic if we're going to see that team bringing those big results once again. That being said, though, you know, Renault, one of, you know, as so many of these teams did back in the early 2000s, basically an unlimited pool of money that they can pour into this project if they need to. So it is going to be very, very interesting to see, of course. Do they just try and make sure the 2004 car's competitive by the end of the year? Or do they accept quite early on that 2005 is going to be the year that they try and fight for a World Championship? It worked out quite well for them IRL. Will we see the same thing, though, inside this mod? Only time will tell. Jenson Button, though, of course, is always able to extract a lot out of these V10 machines. Going to be excited to see what he and Wurz can do over the course of the season, even if it ends up being a battle that is spending a lot of the time behind us. Another team kind of in a similar scenario is sadly Sauber. Yes, often a bit of an underdog that we've loved to see do really, really well throughout this career mode. You know, they've always done well. They've always kind of punched above their weight, it feels like, inside this mod career mode. But as we kind of saw with Sauber for a couple of years in the early 2000s before they were bought out by BMW, their pace is really starting to struggle as more and more big money comes into the sport. Yeah, Sauber are really, really struggling at the moment, and it looks like they are going to be probably still ahead of Minardi and Jordan, but points are going to be very, very lucky to come by for the team over the course of the season. Jarno Trulli and Olivier Panis, a bit like McLaren, they've tried to combine experience with obviously youth as well. Jarno Trulli, of course, the real-life winner of the 2004 Monaco Grand Prix. I'll be very, very impressed if he can do that inside this career mode this season. Like I said, Jaguar probably Sauber 8th best in terms of performance early on this year. They're going to be battling with Jaguar. As you can see in the background footage, these guys had a great battle throughout pre-season testing as well. And as always, it's fantastic to be listening to all of these V10s as well as they race their way around the Albert Park circuit. But yeah, Sauber, like we said, they might be able to spring a surprise. They might be able to get a couple of big results over the course of the year, but I certainly don't think we're going to see the highs that we saw towards the end of last year as well. It feels like so many teams spent too much time on 2003 and weren't really prepared ready for 2004. One team that did the exact opposite, though, has got to be BAR. Anthony Davidson and Zob Baumgartner once again staying with the team. We saw, of course, in 2002, Anthony Davidson was an absolute giant killer. The amount of great results we saw him get early on that season was genuinely staggering. It's probably been one of my favourite things we've ever seen inside this mod. And it looks like BAR again then. They kind of have one season off, one season on so far inside this career mode. And yeah, 2004, at least based on pre-season testing, that car very, very quick. In fact, by the end of testing, it was the quickest car by a few tenths of a second, actually, in the end. Everybody was a little bit skeptical about, you know, how much fuel they were running. Were they just trying to go for some glory runs, trying to bring some more sponsors onto the team? But Honda, of course, you know, looking at potentially buying out the team outright in the not-too-distant future, was kind of the British American Tobacco kind of part of the team looking to potentially try and get a little bit more bang for their buck with the sale of the organisation. So Bob Gardner, he had a pretty disappointing 2003 for the most part, not quite able to get the same results he was hoping for. Once again, it looks like Anthony Davidson is going to be leading that team. Of course, as always, he'll have to run down from the commentary box after doing the pre-race introductions, jump into his BAR Honda, and then try to drive as fast as he possibly can. Another team though, and of course the big one for us, we have signed with Toyota. So much Japanese money coming into Formula 1 back in the early 2000s, and I think a lot of you guys thought I was mad to be joining the Toyota team ready for 2004. Obviously, their lineup last year, Jacques Villeneuve and Giancarlo Fisichella, they have replaced one world champion with another one. Villeneuve has finally decided to call it a career in Formula 1, and, well, I'm not going to hide the fact Toyota were willing to pay me a lot of money to join the team. That being said though, I wanted a kind of big development project. I wanted a team that obviously we could really try and build up together and obviously hope to fight for world championships in the not too distant future. 2003 though was a pretty dismal year for Toyota, all things being considered, only finishing 7th overall in the Constructors' Championship. But again, they are a team that has put all their eggs in the 2004 basket, and, well, pre-season testing pace looks to be very good. I don't quite think we're going to be there fighting for wins straight away at the start of the year, but I think if we can be really consistent, if we can bring good upgrades to the team over the course of the campaign, hopefully, by the end of the year, we're going to be able to chalk up a couple of victories, and of course, ideally, I'm looking at 2005. I think that is hopefully going to be the year where we're going to be able to fight for a world championship with the team as well. So hopefully that kind of all comes together. We'll have to wait and see as to how things work out when all is said and done. But very excited to be racing with Toyota for 2004. Also, I must admit, great to be back with the Arrows team, which of course we started with back in 1998. Still a lot of personnel with the team as well, obviously with all of the Japanese money being poured into the organisation. Easily though, out of kind of the big money teams in the sport, Jaguar, just like they tended to be IRL, the biggest disappointment of all of them at the moment. As I mentioned, I think they're not going to be scoring points very often. Their most likely battle this year is going to be with Sauber. They have kept their lineup though of Rubens Barrichello and Mark Webber, despite the fact Webber didn't score a single point last year, and Barrichello was only able to get a few on the board by season's end as well. Obviously, Rubens, one of the only drivers now that I believe has been with the same team since his career mode kicked off all the way back in 1998. I'm trying to think, I believe him, David Coulthard, and Micheal Schumacher are the only drivers still where they started inside this game. And, well, I do keep umming and ahhing about whether Barrichello does end up going to Ferrari or something like that. But it has been interesting to kind of see him lead this team as best as he can. And of course, you know, all these rumours that Dietrich Mateschitz and the Red Bull energy drink company could be buying out the team ready for 2005. Could that see a big boost of performance in the not too distant future as well? For Barrichello, he's got to play the long game. He's got to be patient. Maybe Jaguar can spring a surprise this year, but again, pre-season testing pace is not looking fantastic. Mark Webber, he will want to look to try and build on a fairly quiet 2003 campaign, and he'll be hoping that he can get some bigger results this year and hopefully get the better of his Brazilian teammate. Finally though, heading down into our backmarkers, of course, Minardi and Jordan. Both teams actually have got a completely new lineup ready for the season. Of course, as always, these two teams are basically trying to bring money in as desperately quickly as they possibly can. Nick Heidfeld, Felipe Massa, they tried to go with two rookies last year. It didn't really work for them, so they have hired experienced driver Mark Genet ready for 2004. But he has been paired by Justin Wilson, who was arguably one of the most underrated British Formula 1 drivers that we've ever seen. Only ever got one season in the sport, actually was a lot quicker, but just actually bizarrely limited by his height. Ultimately, yeah, they just couldn't build Formula 1 cars. They were so compromised because he was so tall. that ultimately, yeah, his Formula 1 career didn't go on much further. In real life, for those of you that didn't know, sadly, he was killed in an IndyCar crash quite a few years ago now, back at Pocono in a freak accident. So we never kind of really got to see this side of the pond, Justin Wilson, in all of his glory as well. But yeah, I thought it was important that we bring him into this career mode as well, because, you know, he was a name that was always kind of bouncing around the Formula 1 paddock back in the early 2000s. That being said, though, racing with Minardi, points are going to be very hard to come by. He's going to need a couple of miracle results, or reliably beat his teammate Marc Genet, and maybe a move up the grid could be coming in the not-too-distant future as well. He's one that I'm going to be keeping my eye on over the course of this season as well there. And last but not least then, Jordan. I believe they actually scored points more often than Minardi did last year, but sadly for them, Minardi had an 8th place result, and I think Jordan had 2 9ths or a 9th and 2 10ths, if I remember correctly. They were the quicker car out of the two, but ultimately that doesn't mean a lot based on countback results by the end of the year. Last season's lineup of Takuma Sato and Ralf Schumacher have both gone. Takuma Sato taking a year out on the sidelines as BAR's reserve driver. Of course, if Zoltan Baumgartner isn't delivering, then he could be into that drive before we know it. But yeah, Jordan, though, they have picked up Timo Glock, who of course has kind of bounced around the bottom end of the grid a couple of times before inside this game. And then 1999 IRL super sub Mika Salo has joined him this season. It's an odd lineup. It's a very weird lineup, but hopefully they're going to be able to deliver some goods. And even if they can just beat Minardi on countback, it is going to be very, very important for that team. Prize money, of course, for these back markers is absolutely everything. And again, you know, we said at the start of 2003, I didn't think any of these teams would score points. They did end up managing it. But, of course, again, it is just when you get crazy races and things like that, or strategy, that absolutely plays into their hand as well, with some well-timed safety cars. But there we are then, our entire grid lineup ready for the 2004 F1 season. We've got some big names, we've got some crazy driver moves. I've already recorded the Australian Grand Prix. I promise you guys, it is an absolute banger. You do not want to miss it. Ferrari, Williams, BAR, Toyota, McLaren, all fighting up towards the top. It is going to be a great season. Hopefully we're going to be able to get some glory with Toyota. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll be back very soon ready for the Australian Grand Prix.